The door hit the frame so hard the windows rattled. Vivian pressed her back against the cold marble wall outside the gallery, rain soaking through her wool coat. Her leather portfolio case gripped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Inside, she could hear her mother rearranging chairs, the sharp click of heels against polished floor, erasing evidence of the confrontation that had just dismantled 26 years in under 10 minutes. Her father's voice still echoed in her skull, not loud, which was worse. You've made your choice. Live with it. But you'll do it without our name, our resources, or our acknowledgement. She had expected anger. She'd prepared for shouting, for the theatrical disappointment Judge Marcus Ashford was known for in his courtroom, the cutting cross-examinations that had made him a legend in Philadelphia legal circles. What she hadn't prepared for was the cold administrative efficiency with which he'd severed her from the family, like signing off on a case file he no longer needed. 26 years. And it took him less time to disown me than it takes to order coffee. The security guard by the elevator was pretending not to notice her standing there, soaked and shaking. She recognized him, Gerald, who'd worked this building since she was in high school, who used to sneak her mints when she'd wait in the lobby for her father to finish late meetings. He caught her eye once. The sorrow in his face was so naked it almost broke her. She lifted her chin, pulled her coat tighter, and walked out into the November rain. Have you ever been so sure you were doing the right thing that you risked everything, only to watch your entire world collapse? Have you ever had to choose between the life everyone expected you to live and the one you knew you were meant for? That moment when you realize the people who shaped you will never accept the person you're becoming. Vivian Ashford was standing at that exact crossroads, and she'd just chosen a path that cost her everything. If you've ever felt invisible to the people who should see you most, stay with me. This story will change how you see resilience, family, and what it really means to choose yourself. And hit that subscribe button. You're going to want to follow this journey to the end. She'd been the perfect daughter, the one her mother paraded at charity galas in carefully selected dresses that were elegant but never attention-seeking, the one her father mentioned in interviews when journalists asked about work-life balance. Senator, you've had an impressive career. How did you manage it alongside family? He'd smile that measured smile and say, I have a daughter who made it easy. She never gave us a reason to worry. That daughter had graduated summa cum laude from Penn. Architecture, because her grandfather had been an architect and her father appreciated legacy. She'd turned down 3 prestigious firms. In New York to join her uncle's practice in Philadelphia, staying close, being available, designing award-winning spaces that earned quiet accolades in journals people actually read. She'd learned early how to be what they needed, accomplished but not threatening, beautiful but not vain, present but never demanding too much space in their carefully organized lives. She'd mastered the particular art of making her own ambitions look like natural extensions of the family's expectations. And it had worked. For 26 years, it had worked. Until 3 weeks ago, she'd told them over dinner at the house in Chestnut Hill, the dining room where every important family announcement had ever been made, Margot's acceptance to Princeton, her father's judgeship appointment, her mother's position on the museum board. Vivian had chosen her words carefully, practiced them. She was leaving Philadelphia, leaving the firm, taking a position in New Mexico, designing affordable housing for indigenous communities. Her mother's fork had stopped halfway to her mouth. New Mexico, she'd repeated, as if Vivian had said Mars. Her father had been more direct. You'll embarrass this family. You'll waste your education. And for what? So you can feel like you've done something meaningful. The way he'd said meaningful, like it was a naive concept, believed only by children and fools. Yes, Vivian had said. Exactly that. The argument had been building for 3 weeks. Tense phone calls, her mother's passive-aggressive comments about responsibility, her sister Margot's confusion. Why would you leave everything we've built? We, Vivian had thought, as if I helped build this cage. But tonight it had detonated, because tonight she'd told them the rest, that she was leaving in 2 days, that the position was already accepted, that the lease on her apartment was ending because she'd chosen not to renew it, and that she wasn't asking permission. Her mother had gone very still, that particular stillness that meant she was calculating social damage. What would she tell the garden club, the museum committee, the women who asked after Vivian at every event. Her father had stood, walked to his study, returned with a folder. Already prepared, she'd realized with nauseating clarity. He'd opened it on the table between their barely touched plates. Papers, legal documents, typed and notarized. "If you walk away from this family's expectations," he'd said, sliding the folder toward her, "you walk away from everything that comes with it." She'd read them, her hands steady even as her heart tried to break through her ribs. Severance from the family trust, removal from the firm's employee roster and benefits, termination of her apartment lease, which she now understood had always been in her father's name, her car registration, her health insurance, her gym membership, all of it tied to family accounts she'd never questioned because she'd never had reason to. They'd prepared for this possibility. They'd prepared to erase her. Her mother had said nothing, just turned toward the kitchen and begun clearing dishes that hadn't been finished. The soft clink of porcelain against porcelain, a sound Vivienne would remember for the rest of her life. "Sign it," her father had said, "or stay and honor your commitments." She'd looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd come to every school play, who'd told her once, when she was 12 and struggling with a bully, that the Ashfords didn't run from hard things. Apparently, they just disowned people who chose different hard things. She'd signed. Her hand had barely shaken. Now, she was standing outside in the rain with $73 in her personal checking account, a suitcase she'd packed that morning when she still believed this conversation might go differently, and the leather portfolio that held every design she'd ever been proud of. Everything else, gone. Her phone buzzed. A text from Margot. "Mom's crying." Dad locked himself in his office. "What did you do?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Where are you going?" Just blame, transferred cleanly to her shoulders where it had always eventually landed. Vivienne turned off her phone. She found a hostel in Old City, the kind of place she'd walked past 1,000 times and never noticed. Tucked above a Vietnamese restaurant where the smell of pho and lemongrass drifted up through the floorboards. $30 a night. The woman at the desk took one look at Vivienne's wet designer coat and expensive leather portfolio and asked no questions, just handed her a key and pointed toward the stairs. The room was barely larger than a closet. A single bed with a thin mattress, a lamp that flickered when she turned it on, a window that faced a brick wall 3 feet away. Vivienne sat on the bed, still in her wet coat, and let herself feel the full weight of what she'd lost. Then she opened her portfolio, looked at her work, sketches and renderings and blueprints for buildings that didn't exist yet but could, structures designed not for prestige but for people, spaces that acknowledged dignity as a design principle. This was why she'd said yes to New Mexico, not to punish her family, not to prove something to anyone who wouldn't understand anyway, but because when the offer had come, unexpected and terrifying and perfect, she'd felt something she hadn't felt in years. Certainty. She fell asleep still wearing her coat, her portfolio open beside her like a promise. She didn't cry until the 3rd day. The realization had been gradual, then sudden. Her mother wasn't going to call. Her father wasn't going to reconsider. Margot had sent one more text. "You're being selfish." And then, nothing. Vivienne had always been the one who reached out first, who smoothed things over, who made it easy for them to forgive her for the small rebellions she'd never quite had the courage to commit until now. This time she didn't reach out. This time the silence stretched, and she understood something she should have understood years ago. Their love had always had conditions attached. She just never triggered them until now. Comment below. If you've ever had to choose between your dreams and your family's approval, if you've ever been called selfish for choosing yourself, you're not alone in this. Drop your story. Let's build a community of people who understand. She found work at an architectural salvage yard in Fishtown. Inventory and sales. Nothing that required her degree, but something that kept her hands busy and paid just enough to cover the hostel and food. Her boss was a woman named Delilah, silver hair pulled back in a paint-stained bandana, hands that had built and rebuilt 1,000 things. Delilah asked her once why someone with her background was working there, starting over. Vivienne had said. Delilah had nodded. Good a place as any. The work was physical, in a way her previous job never had been, hauling reclaimed wood, cataloging vintage fixtures, talking to customers about the history embedded in materials, pocket doors from Victorian row homes, stained glass windows from demolished churches, marble mantles that had warmed families for 100 years. She liked it more than she'd expected, liked the honesty of it. You lifted something heavy, and it was heavy. You cleaned something dirty, and it became clean. There was no performance. No one cared what family she came from or what she used to be. She was careful with money. $73 became $90, then $140. She bought groceries from discount stores, learned to stretch meals, rice and beans and vegetables from the Asian market, where everything cost half what it did at the stores she used to shop at. She stopped thinking of the things she used to consider necessities: manicures, lattes, the gym membership she'd lost along with everything else. She didn't feel sorry for herself. That surprised her. What she felt was lighter. As if she'd been carrying something heavy for so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to move without it. But there were hard days. A morning when nausea hit so suddenly she barely made it to the salvage yard bathroom. She'd sat on the floor for 20 minutes, forehead pressed against the cool tile, breathing through her mouth, until the world stopped spinning. An afternoon when a customer asked if she knew any good architects in the city, and she'd had to swallow the answer she used to give so easily. Actually, I am one. An evening when she walked past the gallery where her family attended openings. She saw them through the tall windows, her mother in pearls, her father holding court with a circle of lawyers and donors, Margot laughing at something someone said, the family portrait without her in it. She'd expected that to hurt more than it did. Instead, what she felt was distance, not anger, not even grief. Just the strange, disorienting recognition that the life she'd thought was hers had never actually fit. Like wearing shoes half a size too small for so long, you forgot feet weren't supposed to hurt. She noticed the car in her second week at the salvage yard. Black sedan, always parked across the street, but in different spots. Sometimes by the corner bus stop, sometimes near the coffee shop 2 doors down, sometimes idling at the light when she left for the day. It didn't follow her home, or if it did, it was subtle enough she couldn't confirm it, but it was there, consistently. A presence she felt more than saw. The first time she told herself she was being paranoid. Poverty and stress did things to your mind, made you see patterns that weren't there. By the 5th time, she knew she wasn't imagining it. Once she'd stopped on the sidewalk and turned directly toward it, stared at the tinted windows. She couldn't see who was inside, just her own reflection staring back. After a long moment, the car had pulled away. Her heart had done something complicated in her chest. A thought had formed that she immediately shut down, because letting herself believe it and being wrong would be worse than not knowing. She told herself it was nothing, but she started noticing other things, small things. The hostel manager mentioned one morning that her rent had been paid a month in advance. Anonymous donor, she'd said. Happened sometimes with the church fund, but Vivian hadn't applied to any church fund. A care package appeared at the salvage yard. Delilah handed it to her with a raised eyebrow. Someone dropped this off for you. Inside, high-quality art supplies, the exact pencils and sketch paper she used to use, protein bars, a box of ginger tea, and, at the bottom, prenatal vitamins. Prenatal vitamins she hadn't told anyone she needed. Delilah had looked at her carefully. Someone's looking out for you. Vivian had stared at the package for a long time, her hands shaking slightly as she touched each item. Only one person knew enough to send exactly these things, but that person had been gone for 4 months. She'd met Lucas Brennan 8 months ago, though met felt insufficient for what had actually happened. She'd been scouting a building in Point Breeze for potential adaptive reuse. Historic factory, abandoned for years but the bones still good. Tall windows, original timber beams, the kind of space that could become something beautiful if someone cared enough to see past the decay. She'd been standing in the middle of the empty floor, measuring light, taking notes, when she'd heard footsteps. A man had walked in, tall, quietly composed, dressed in dark jeans and a jacket that was expensive without being flashy. He'd looked around, then at her. "You're the architect," he'd said, not a question. "How did you know?" He'd smiled slightly. "The way you're looking at the space, like you're seeing what it could be, not what it is." They'd talked for 2 hours, about the building, about design philosophy, about the difference between architecture that served ego and architecture that served people. He'd listened in a way that made her feel like what she said actually mattered, not performing interest, actually interested. She'd learned he was a developer. Private projects mostly, restoration and affordable housing. He hadn't mentioned a company name. She hadn't thought to ask. Later she'd realized that omission was deliberate. What followed was 5 months of something she still didn't have precise words for. Not a relationship in any conventional sense. They'd never defined it. Never had the conversation about what they were or where it was going. But there had been evenings that stretched into mornings. Conversations that felt like collaborative creation. A steadiness in him she hadn't encountered before. He never rushed her. Never performed some version of himself he thought she wanted to see. Just existed alongside her in a way that made her feel seen. Really seen. For the first time in her life, they'd meet at construction sites, in parks, at diners where the coffee was terrible, but the booths were private. He'd look at her sketches and ask questions that made her think differently. She'd challenge his assumptions about what communities actually needed. They'd argue and laugh and sit in comfortable silence. She'd never brought him to family events. Some instinct had kept that part of her life separate. She told herself it was because things with Lucas were undefined, casual. But really, it was because she knew her family would find a way to make him smaller, and she wanted to keep this one thing untouched by their judgment. And then in July, he'd gone quiet. A missed call became 2 days of silence, became a week. His phone went straight to voicemail. The project site they'd been collaborating on was suddenly being handled by someone else. A man in a suit who looked at her like she was trespassing. She'd gone to the address she had for him, a loft in Northern Liberties, and found it empty, not just vacant, emptied. No forwarding information, no note, nothing, just gone. She'd told herself it was what it looked like. He'd lost interest, moved on. She'd been a diversion, something to fill time between projects. It happened. People left. That was the world. But it hadn't felt that way, and the not knowing had been worse than any clear ending. Now, watching the black car from the salvage yard window, she let herself think the thought she'd been avoiding. What if he didn't leave? What if he was still here? Who do you think is in that car? Drop your theories in the comments. And if this story is hitting different, if you're feeling every bit of Vivian's confusion and hope and fear, smash that like button. Let me know you're here. Let me know this story matters to you. The envelope appeared under her hostel door on a Thursday morning. Vivian almost stepped on it. She'd been heading out early for a shift at the salvage yard. Still half asleep, hair pulled back wet from the shower. When she opened the door, there it was. Heavy paper, cream-colored, the kind of envelope that held wedding invitations or condolence cards. No name on the front, no return address. She picked it up, turned it over. The back was sealed with actual wax, dark blue, embossed with initials she couldn't make out. She stood in the narrow hallway in her work clothes, the building quiet except for the hum of someone's air conditioner and the distant sounds of the restaurant below, preparing for lunch service. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single card, embossed, heavy weight paper, 4 lines printed in clean type. Your housing has been secured. Your travel to New Mexico is arranged. You owe no one anything for this. You are not alone. She read it, standing in the center of her room, the card trembling slightly in her hands. She turned it over. Nothing. She went to the door and looked down both ends of the hallway. Empty. She sat on the edge of her bed for a long time. The housing was real. She called the number printed at the bottom of the card. A property management company in Albuquerque. They confirmed a lease in her name. A small casita in the Northeast Heights. 6 months paid in full. Utilities included. Her name on everything. The travel arrangement was real too. A flight booked for the 15th. A rental car reserved. A stipend deposited into an account that had been opened in her name at a credit union she'd never heard of. $1,500. Just sitting there. Available. She should have felt grateful. Relieved. This was everything she needed. The answer to problems she'd been trying to solve with $73 and sheer determination. Instead, she felt something more complicated, because generosity without explanation was still control, however kindly packaged. She'd spent 26 years being managed by people who loved her conditionally, who gave her things and called it support, when really, it was another way to keep her in place, to make sure she stayed grateful, stayed obligated, stayed small. If this was Lucas, and she was increasingly certain it was, then she needed to understand what he wanted from her, and why he thought disappearing and reappearing through anonymous gestures was acceptable. She didn't want to be saved. She'd spent her whole life being someone's perfect daughter, perfect niece, perfect addition to the family portrait. She wanted to be respected. She wanted someone to see her as whole, not as a problem to be solved or a project to be managed. She called the number on the card. It rang twice, then his voice, the particular cadence of it, the slight pause before he spoke, the way her name sounded different in his mouth than it did anywhere else. Vivienne. She said nothing for a moment. Outside her window, she could hear the city moving, buses hissing to stops, street vendors calling out, the steady rhythm of everyday life continuing like nothing had changed. "You have a lot to explain," she finally said. "I know." His voice was steady, but underneath it, she could hear something else, something that sounded like relief and fear mixed together. "Will you give me the chance?" She closed her eyes, pressed the phone against her ear, and made a choice. Where? She met him at a cafe in Rittenhouse Square, neutral ground, a place she'd been 100 times before, where she knew the exits and wouldn't feel trapped. She arrived first, deliberately, ordered tea she didn't drink, sat by the window where she could see the square, families with strollers, college students sprawled on the grass, an old man feeding pigeons from a paper bag. Normal life, continuing. Lucas arrived exactly on time. She saw him through the window before he saw her, walking across the square with that same quiet certainty. He looked exactly as she remembered. Dark jacket, jeans, hair slightly too long. He also looked entirely different. The quietness she'd attributed to confidence, she now understood, was something else. The ease of someone who'd already fought battles she couldn't see, who'd learned to carry weight without broadcasting it. He came inside, saw her, something crossed his face too quick to name. He sat down across from her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Vivienne said the thing she hadn't planned to say, the thing that came out before she could edit it into something more controlled. "I defended you. When my family cut me off, I didn't tell them why I was leaving or who I'd been spending time with. They asked if there was someone, if that's why I was making this choice. I could have told them, could have given them your name, made it about you instead of about me. I protected you while you were gone. I need you to know that before you say anything." Something moved across his face, not surprise, something deeper. He nodded slowly, like he was receiving information that confirmed something he already knew. "I know," he said. "I know exactly what you did, and I'm going to spend as long as it takes making sure that cost you nothing." She hadn't expected that. She'd expected excuses, explanations that centered his reasons, his fears, his choices. Instead, he'd started with her cost. "Tell me," she said. So he did. He told her everything, not in a rush, not with excuses layered over facts, just plainly, the way she'd first trusted him for. His family ran Brennan Holdings, one of the largest private development companies on the East Coast. She'd heard of them. Everyone had. They'd redeveloped entire neighborhoods, built mixed-use complexes that changed city skylines, funded affordable housing initiatives that actually worked. He wasn't the heir in any ceremonial sense. He was the operational head, had been since his mother's death 3 years ago. Heart attack at 52. Sudden, devastating. His father had stepped back. Lucas had stepped up. And with that came a network of obligations and threats she wouldn't have understood until now. When their relationship had started becoming something real, someone inside the company had taken notice. A rival faction within the board, men who'd spent years managing his father's grief and softness to their advantage, who'd been positioning themselves to take control when Lucas inevitably failed under the pressure. They'd made it clear that any outside relationship he pursued would be used against him. "Not against me directly," Lucas said. "Against you." He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup, hadn't touched it. "They had people watching me, following me, documenting where I went and who I saw. When I understood what that meant for you, what it could mean, I made a decision. I removed myself. I thought distance would make you invisible to them." Vivienne looked at him steadily. It made me invisible to everyone. He didn't look away from that. He held it, let it land. I was wrong, he said. I thought I was protecting you. I was also protecting myself from a harder choice. I see that now. What harder choice? Dealing with them directly, forcing the confrontation I'd been avoiding. It would have meant restructuring the entire company, going after people my father considered friends, risking projects that employed hundreds of people. I told myself I was being responsible, strategic, but really, I was afraid. Did you know about my family? About what they did? Not when I left. I found out 2 months later. He paused, seemed to be choosing his words carefully. I had someone check that you were safe. Not invasively, just confirmation that you were okay. When I understood what your family had done, when I learned you were living in a hostel and working at a salvage yard. He stopped, collected himself. I wanted to come to you immediately. I was advised that direct contact still carried risk, that the people who'd been watching me were still watching, still waiting for me to make a mistake they could use. So I stayed close in the only way I could, until I dealt with what needed to be dealt with. The car, Vivian said. Yes. The housing, the vitamins. Yes. She was quiet for a moment, processing. Outside the window, an argument had broken out between 2 cab drivers. Horns, shouting, people walking past without stopping. The small dramas of city life playing out like they always did. The board situation, she said. Is it resolved? He almost smiled. Later she would think that was the moment she understood she still knew him. It's resolved, he said. It took time, more time than I wanted. But those men no longer have any position from which to threaten anyone I care about. They've been removed. The company's been restructured. And I've made very sure that what happened to you will never happen to anyone else because of me. How? I can't give you all the details. Some of it's still legally sensitive. But I documented everything they did. Every threat. Every surveillance report. Every attempt to leverage my personal life against the company. I brought it to the full board, to our attorneys, to some very patient federal regulators who were extremely interested in their other activities. He took a breath. It was ugly. It took 4 months, but they're gone, and I'm still here. Vivian sat with that, with the image of Lucas spending 4 months fighting battles she'd known nothing about, while she'd been hauling reclaimed wood and learning to live on $140. Why didn't you tell me? She said. Even just a message. Something to let me know you hadn't just disappeared. Because I didn't want to make promises I couldn't keep. If I'd reached out and said I'm dealing with this, wait for me, and then it hadn't worked. If they'd won and I'd lost everything, you would have waited for nothing, and you'd already lost enough. So you made that choice for me. I did, and that was wrong. He looked at her directly. You deserve to know. You deserve the chance to decide for yourself what you wanted to wait for. I took that from you because I was afraid. Afraid you'd choose to wait and I'd fail. Afraid you'd choose not to wait and I'd lose you. Either way, I was afraid, and I let that fear make me disappear. I'm sorry. She hadn't expected that either. The clean acknowledgement. No justification, just sorry. They talked for 4 hours. The cafe filled and emptied around them. Lunch rush came and went. The barista stopped asking if they needed anything else. They talked about his mother, about the weight he'd carried since her death, about Vivian's family, about the particular pain of being loved conditionally, about architecture and what it meant to build things that lasted, about what they wanted now. No grand declarations, no neat resolutions. What existed between them was something more honest than that. A shared decision to begin again from what was real rather than what was easy. I'm still going to New Mexico, Vivian said. I know. I need to do this alone. Lucas nodded. I know that too. Pause. But alone doesn't have to mean unsupported. I'm not asking to manage your life, Vivian. I'm not asking to fix things or make decisions for you. I'm asking to be in it, in whatever way you'll let me. She looked at him for a long time. This man who'd disappeared and reappeared, who'd made choices she disagreed with and owned them without excuses, who was offering something now that felt different from anything she'd been offered before. On my terms, she said. On your terms. This is what real love looks like. Not control disguised as protection. Not grand gestures that erase your agency, but respect, partnership, the willingness to let someone make their own choices even when you desperately want to make them easier. If this resonates, if you've been waiting for permission to set your own terms, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. She left for Albuquerque in December. Lucas didn't come with her. That had been her first condition. This move, this new beginning, had to be hers, not theirs. Not yet. He drove her to the airport, carried her suitcase to the curb, hugged her in a way that felt like a promise and a release at the same time. "Call me when you land," he said. "I will." And Vivienne, she turned. "I'm proud of you." She felt something crack open in her chest. The good kind of breaking. The casita was small, adobe style, wooden vigas across the ceiling, a little courtyard with a struggling juniper tree, windows that faced the Sandia Mountains, the kind of place that felt like it had been waiting for someone to fill it with purpose. She unpacked slowly, set up her drafting table by the window, hung her sketches on the walls, bought a coffee maker and a plant she immediately forgot to water. She started the job the following week. The firm was a cooperative, 6 architects, all committed to sustainable community development, projects that served people who'd been overlooked by conventional development, indigenous communities, low-income families, elderly populations who needed accessible design. The work was hard, different from anything she'd done before. She had to unlearn habits, question assumptions, listen more than she talked. She loved it. For the first time in her life, she was creating things that mattered in ways she could see, not buildings that would be photographed for magazines, but spaces where kids could play safely, where elders could gather, where families could live with dignity. Lucas called twice a week, true to his word. He didn't ask when he could visit, didn't pressure, just listened as she described her projects, offered thoughts when she asked, celebrated her wins, commiserated her frustrations. She sent him photos, sketches, progress shots of a community center taking shape. He responded with the kind of attention that told her he understood what this work meant, not just to her career, to her. In February, her mother called. Vivienne almost didn't answer. She stared at the name on her screen for 3 rings, remembered the sound of dishes being cleared, the deliberate silence. She answered. The conversation was careful, her mother's voice tight with something that might have been shame but couldn't quite land as apology. "We saw the article," her mother said. "What article?" "The piece in Architectural Digest, about the CO op, about your housing project. Your father showed it to me." Vivienne hadn't known there was an article. She looked it up later. 3 paragraphs in a roundup of emerging voices in sustainable design. Her name mentioned once. Her parents had seen it. "You look well," her mother continued. "In the photo. Thank you. The baby. You look healthy." "I am." Silence. The difficult kind. "I wanted to call sooner," her mother said. "Your father, it's been difficult." "For him," Vivienne said, not a question. Her mother made a sound, small, pained, for all of us. It wasn't an apology, but it was movement. Slow and inadequate, but movement. They talked for 20 minutes, carefully, about the weather, about Margot, who was apparently struggling at Princeton, about neutral things that didn't require either of them to name what had happened. When they hung up, Vivienne sat in her courtyard, watched the light change on the mountains, felt something complicated and unfinished settle in her chest. Her father didn't call, but in March, Margot showed up. Vivienne opened the door on a Saturday afternoon to find her sister standing there, suitcase beside her, eyes red. "I didn't know where else to go," Margot said. Vivienne pulled her inside. They talked for 3 hours. Margot told her everything. The pressure at Princeton, the expectations, the slow crushing realization that she was living someone else's vision of success, that she'd watched Vivienne leave and called her selfish when really she'd been terrified. Because if Vivienne could walk away, what did that mean about Margot's choice to stay? "I thought you were being reckless," Margot said, "but you were being brave. And I didn't know how to tell you that without admitting I was afraid." Vivienne didn't perform forgiveness, didn't rush toward it. She let it exist as something incomplete that might become more complete over time. Some things healed cleanly. Others healed the way bones did after a bad break, fully, but leaving a record. Before Margot left, She handed Vivienne a small box. "Dad wanted you to have this," she said. Inside was their grandfather's watch, the one their father had always said would go to his eldest child. "He didn't come because he doesn't know what to say," Margot continued, "but he wanted you to have it." Vivienne looked at the watch for a long time, turned it over in her hands, felt the weight of it. "Tell him thank you," she said. Lucas visited in March. He stayed at a hotel, at her insistence, but they spent every evening together, walking the Bosque trails along the Rio Grande, eating at family-owned restaurants in the South Valley, talking about everything and nothing, building something new from what the hardest year of their lives had taught them. On his last night they sat on her casita's small porch, the sky turning impossible colors over the Sandia Mountains, pink and orange and purple layered like paint. "You were right to make me wait," Lucas said. "I know." He laughed. "You're different. I'm the same," she corrected. "I'm just not hiding it anymore." He reached for her hand. She let him take it. "I'm moving here," he said. "Not tomorrow, but soon. The company's expanding into Southwest projects, sustainable development, tribal partnerships. I'll be heading that division." He paused. "I'm not doing it for you. I want to be clear about that. This is my choice, my work, but the timing, the fact that you're here, that matters to me." She looked at him, this man who'd disappeared and come back different, who'd learned the same hard lessons she had about the difference between protection and partnership. "When?" she asked. "August." She nodded. Okay. They didn't rush. They built slowly, carefully, on terms they both shaped. And when her father finally called, a year and a half after that night in the gallery, Vivienne answered. The conversation was brief, stilted, her father's voice carrying the particular stiffness of someone who'd been wrong and couldn't quite say so directly. "I'm proud of what you've built," he said. "Thank you," she replied, and meant it. 2 years after leaving Philadelphia, Vivienne stood in front of a completed housing development she'd designed. 40 units of affordable, beautiful, dignified space for families who'd been told they didn't deserve beauty. Adobe construction, passive solar heating, community gardens, playgrounds designed with input from actual children. It had taken 18 months, countless revisions, fights with contractors, and compromises with budgets, late nights and early mornings and moments when she'd wondered if she actually knew what she was doing. And now it was done. Lucas stood beside her. So did Delilah, who'd flown out for the opening, and Margot, who'd quietly started applying to graduate programs in urban planning. Her parents hadn't come, but they'd sent flowers, white roses, no card, just flowers. It was something. Vivienne looked at the building, her building, and felt the particular satisfaction of having created something that mattered from a year that tried to break her. She thought about the woman who'd stood outside a gallery in the rain with $73 in a suitcase, who'd been disowned for choosing herself. That woman was still her, but she'd built something from that moment, not in spite of the breaking, but because of it. The life they tried to diminish became the foundation she built on, not in spite of what she lost, because of what she chose to keep. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs this reminder. Someone who's standing at their own crossroads, wondering if choosing themselves makes them selfish, wondering if they'll survive the breaking. Tell them they will. Tell them it's worth it. Comment below. What moment hit you hardest? Was it the disownment, the black car, the moment Lucas told the truth, the reconciliation? Tell me. Let's talk about it. Your story isn't over just because someone closed a door. Sometimes the best thing that happens is being forced to find your own way out. To build something new from the wreckage, to discover that the life you thought you wanted was actually just the life you thought you were supposed to want, and the real life, the one that fits, that one's waiting on the other side of the hardest choice you'll ever make. Like this video. If you believe you can lose everything and still rise stronger, subscribe to Mr. Black Drama Stories TV for more stories about resilience, transformation, and the courage it takes to choose yourself. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that might be exactly what you need to hear. You can lose everything and still build something beautiful. Remember that.